Liebe Christina, lieber Herr Vogeler, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer der heute begonnenen Masterclass, ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute Abend zur Keynote Lecture hier im Saarländischen Landesarchiv begrüßen zu dürfen. Dass Sie als Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer der Masterclass zu wissenschaftlich-digitalen Editionsgrundsätzen und Methoden heute den Weg hier in ein staatliches Archiv gefunden haben, ist sicher kein Zufall, sondern gewiss auch der Thematik geschuldet. Und dass es dazu noch unser Haus ist, das Sie ausgewählt haben, freut mich besonders. Blickt man zurück zu den Anfängen kritischer Editionspraxis, so stellt man sehr schnell fest, dass es sehr früh einen festen Konnex zwischen Archivaren und Editoren gab. Mit den verfassungsrechtlichen Umbrüchen durch den Untergang des Alten Reiches wandelte sich die Bedeutung der in den Archiven verwahrten Unterlagen. Die teils jahrhundertealten Schriftstücke besaßen für die neuen verfassungsrechtlichen Rahmenbedingungen und damit für die Gegenwart keine Rechtsrelevanz mehr, sondern stattdessen wurden sie zu schriftlichen Zeugnissen vergangener Verhältnisse. Aus rechtlichen Werten wurden somit historisch-kulturelle Werte oder, um im Duktus der Zeitzeugen zu bleiben, schriftliche Denkmäler. Auch das Selbstverständnis der Archive wandelte sich durch diese Umbrüche, weil erstmals die Frage danach aufgeworfen wurde, warum etwas Schriftliches auf Dauer verwahrt werden soll, obwohl ihm jede Rechtsrelevanz für Gegenwart und Zukunft fehlte. Als Antwort formulierten die Archive hieraufhin Zwecke der Nutzung und Auswertung, also die Anfänge einer erst langsam liberaler werdenden Einsichtnahme durch Dritte in das Archivgut. Und damit wiederum war die Frage aufgeworfen, ob sich nicht auch Möglichkeiten und Methoden zur ortsunabhängigen Nutzung entwickeln ließen, um Dritten auch bei räumlicher Entfernung zu einem Archiv die Einsichtnahme in die historischen Unterlagen zu ermöglichen. Und so kam vor allem den Archivaren des 19. und frühen 20. Jahrhunderts vielfach die Aufgabe zu, die eigenen Bestände durch die Erarbeitung von Editions- und Registenwerken besser nutzbar zu machen oder aber sich in größere Editionsvorhaben auf regionaler oder nationaler Ebene einzubringen. Johann Friedrich Böhmer beispielsweise stand in seiner Heimatstadt Frankfurt am Main in Personalunion sowohl dem Stadtarchiv als auch der Stadtbibliothek vor und übernahm gemeinsam mit dem in Hannover ebenfalls als Archivar und Bibliothekar tätigen Georg Heinrich Perz die Leitung der MGH, die bereits frühzeitig qualitative Standards setzte. Mit den Register Imperii und der MGH wurden vor bald 200 Jahren zwei bis heute bestehende Großprojekte von internationalem Ruf begründet. Nach dieser sehr engen Symbiose im 19. Jahrhundert wurden insbesondere seit der Mitte des 20. Jahrhunderts immer deutlicher Brüche erkennbar, was sicherlich auch auf Professionalisierungsbestrebungen beider Seiten zurückzuführen ist. Sowohl einerseits bei den Archivaren als auch bei den mittlerweile verstärkt in Akademieprojekten und universitären Instituten tätigen Editoren. Vor dem Hintergrund der digitalen Revolution scheinen beide Disziplinen jedoch wieder verstärkt zusammenzufinden, was ich sehr begrüße und dies nicht nur im Hinblick auf die Art der Bereitstellung von digitalisierten Quellen zur bestmöglichen Nach- und Weiternutzung, sondern auch hinsichtlich größerer Fragestellungen wie etwa der Etablierung von genuin digitalen Hilfswissenschaften betrifft. Die Archive bleiben trotz zahlreicher weiterer Aufgabenfelder, die enorme personelle und finanzielle Kapazitäten binden, auch weiterhin ein verlässlicher Partner und können durch die gezielte Digitalisierung und barrierearme Online-Stellung historischer Dokumente den Grundstock für innovative digitale Editionsvorhaben bereitstellen. Und dies quer zur klassischen Epocheneinteilung und gegebenenfalls auch über die derzeit bekannten Editionsformen hinaus, da etwa durch KI-Einsatz sehr zeitnah auch etwa Audioeditionen von Verhandlungsprotokollen möglich sein werden. Doch um dies zu erreichen, muss man wieder verstärkt miteinander ins Gespräch kommen, Bedarfe und Mindeststandards definieren und diese gemeinsam abstimmen. Und ich hoffe, dass die heutige Veranstaltung ein kleiner Baustein auf dem Weg dorthin werden kann. In Anschluss an Ihren Vortrag, Frau Professor Pierazzo, den wir alle schon mit großer Spannung erwarten, möchte ich Sie daher zu einem Glas Wein und einem kleinen Empfang einladen. Und wer weiß, vielleicht entwickelt sich dann auf dieser Grundlage nachher das ein oder andere Editionsprojekt, das Archiv und Editorik wieder näher zusammenbringt. Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Liebe David, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer der Masterclass, liebe Gäste, die uns online folgen, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich freue mich sehr, Sie alle heute Abend im Landesarchiv willkommen zu heißen. Der heutige Vortrag findet im Rahmen der Masterclass Digital Scholarly Editing statt, die von 19. bis 23. Februar an der Universität des Saarlandes stattfindet. Eine ganze Woche lang befasst sich eine Gruppe von 25 Doktoranden und Postdoktoranden aus verschiedenen Ländern Europas, aus Kanada und den USA und ich habe heute erfahren auch aus Argentinien, intensiv mit dem Erlernen von Techniken und Methoden des digitalen Edierens von historischen Quellen aus unterschiedlichen Epochen. Edieren ist seit jeher ein essentieller Teil der Arbeit des Historikers. Inzwischen sind jedoch der Einsatz von digitalen Techniken und Werkzeugen im Editionsprozess eine Notwendigkeit geworden, um den Anforderungen moderner Wissenschaft gerecht zu werden. Der kontinuierliche Innovationsprozess bis hin zu künstlicher Intelligenz stellt dabei stetig eine Herausforderung im Alltag des Historikers dar. Aus diesem Grund freue ich mich besonders heute Abend, dass wir, also Frau Professorin Elena Pierazzo von der Universität Tours als Referentin gewinnen konnten, eine richtige Expertin in dem Thema. Einen großen Dank geht an dich, lieber David, dass du mit Begeisterung auf meine Anfragen reagiert hast und wir heute Abend als Gäste hier sein dürfen. Du hast uns heute nicht nur einen Raum zur Verfügung gestellt, um über digitale Techniken und Werkzeuge des Edierens zu sprechen und zu diskutieren. Heute Nachmittag hast du uns auch in die Arbeit und in die Problemstellung eines Archivs eingeführt und uns erlaubt, die Schätze, die hier bewahrt sind, im Original in Augenschein zu nehmen. Damit hast du uns erlaubt, von Fragen digitaler Techniken zurück zur Materialität der Quellen zu gehen. Es gibt für eine Masterclass, die sich mit historischen Quellen auseinandersetzt, keinen besseren Ort als ein Archiv. Neben dem Archiv sind viele verschiedene Institutionen. Ich spare die jetzt, weil wir die heute uns schon angehört haben, aber natürlich muss ich zwei mindestens nennen, sind also die Universität des Saarlandes, die Universität Graz und die École Française de Rome. Und ich muss auch hier sagen und danken die zwei Kollegen, Sergi Sancho Fibla von der Universität Padua und Sylvie Duval von der Universität Bologna danken. Ich gebe jetzt das Wort an meinen Kollegen Georg Vogeler von der Universität Graz, der die Referentin des heutigen Abends einführen wird. Ich wünsche Ihnen allen einen interessanten und anregenden Abend und freue mich im Anschluss auf das gemeinsame Beisammensein, zu dem Sie alle herzlich eingeladen sind.
Yeah, I will switch to English now. I won't do the summary of all the previous introductions, although I'm slightly tempted, particularly if an archivist starts to introduce what we are doing, connecting it to the history of the archives as an institution, which started by the separation of administrative practice and historical work, although in reality it wasn't a separation, it was allowing the historians to get into the material of the administration finally and do real research, and by this lots of research only was possible, that this material became historical and wasn't part of a history written by those, by the powerful. That was this kind of possibility starting with the 19th century, which is closely connected to something, to a barrier, a theoretical barrier between research, historical research, and archival work, which today didn't happen. There was no barrier. There was a kind introduction to all this fancy stuff you have here, and even the non-medieval stuff is pretty fancy. So that's pretty nice. That was my summary of your introduction for the non-German speaking people. But it leads me a bit to Elena, because Elena has this kind of history many digital humanists have, being interested in Renaissance authors, Renaissance texts in literature, being interested in the material part of this, being interested in how these texts are really survive. And so doing a master thesis and a PhD traditionally on Anton Francesco Dorni, music criticism and literature of the 16th century, etc., etc. And I have to admit, I even don't know how you glided into the humanities part. All of us did it once, hidden. Nobody knows really when and how. At least she went to London and became part of the King's College Digital Humanities. Well, yeah, Center Lab. I don't know how they were called in the initial times before. Center for Computing the Humanities, and then became part of the Department for Digital Humanities, etc., and made their career in organizing lots of digital humanities, digital edition projects, and engaging in the TI community, becoming a member of the board and chair of the board, director of the board, etc., etc., and well, developing a second heart apart from Anton Francesco Dorni, the second heart dear to digital scholarly editing, and writing finally even a book on this. So I told you earlier this day there are two books you should know. One is Patrick Saal, and the other one is by Elena. These reference work or comprehensive descriptions. Even it's now 10 years old. So all of us feel a bit uncomfortable. Elena moved to France in, I don't remember the precise, 14?
Yes, 10 years now.
Ah, that's nice. Which again is good thing, because that again is pretty well fitting to Saarbrücken. Because this kind of partially French history and close to France history is now realized not only by French-speaking people from Montreal. Come on, if we have on the border lots of French-speaking people. So she's was in Grenoble and now is in Tours at the Center for l'Étude de la Renaissance. Even directing it since 2 years, I think, something. But still having an interest in digital scholarly editing. But finally, she could combine it with this center, this Renaissance interest. There's one anecdote. Elena, forgive me. It's not the first time that she's in Saarbrücken. Yes. She spent half a year over there in the university and etc. And well, thought when she arrived here, thought that's a pretty typical Saarbrücken style official building here. It looks, well, it has its history, but it has a completely different history you would have expected. And maybe that's nice, because when we'll talk about computational scholarly editing and things like ChatGPT, and we had the AI in several talks, maybe it will end up similarly that we say, okay, this had no history, ChatGPT, but we put the history into it and made something historical out of it. Elena, I'm curious what you will tell us. Please, you have the floor.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. Very excited. As Georg just said, 20 years ago, almost to the day, I arrived in Saarbrücken to spend a semester under the direction of Max Pfister. at the Istituto Romanistic to work at the Lei Lexico Etimologico Italiano. And it was really one of the most amazing experiences of my life. So it's really dear to my heart to come to Saarbrücken. Today I intend to present you the first 35 years of digital scholarly editing, a journey that starts with the pioneers who developed digital models for ancient texts and continued to the present day and finally talks about the future. The idea is to propose then a retrospective evaluation of what has worked in recent years, what has not worked, and what we should have done to make it work better. The presentation will therefore be divided into 3 parts: yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But it's important to establish that these ideal divisions do not represent 3 delimited phases, but rather trends that develop in a continuum, that add to each other, intersect, and overlap. And despite their name, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they are not even chronological subdivisions, but rather methodological and heuristic ones. And they're determined not only by the scholarly challenges that they are meant to respond to, but also by technological developments that become available as they occurred. It is difficult to determine when digital edition began to appear because it depends on the definition we want to give them. It is enough to put an ancient text on the internet to define this as a digital edition? Well, if your answer is yes, then we can backdate edition to the 1970s. Project Gutenberg was born in 1971. That's good. 1971. It is in fact the world's largest running digital publishing project, with more than 50 years of life and the putting online of more than 70,000 texts, of which, however, for instance, only 450 are in Italian against more than 60,000 in English, demonstrating a clear Anglo-centric cultural imprint. If, on the other hand, we adopt Patrick Zahle's definition, which distinguishes between digitized and digital edition, where the latter could not be printed without a substantial loss of information, then we have to wait at least until the late 1980s, early 90s, to see the real digital edition. I say see, but perhaps I should say record, since most of the editions developed in that period are now untraceable. See, for instance, the case of the £2.5 million electronic Doomsday Book, started in 1986 and finished in 1993, but it has disappeared from the radar since 1996. In most cases, these editions were published on CD-ROM, a medium that has not stood the test of time. But we can hardly blame this edition for choosing the wrong medium. Let us not forget that the web was born between 92 and 93. Of the edition of that period, but also afterwards, only those that were created for the web or were later converted for the web are preserved today. One thinks of the Beowulf edition, the Canterbury Tales, for instance. But this is not enough. In reality, the only one that has survived are the static edition based on international standards, such as HTML, thus adopting a very low technological profile. Among these, there are also cases of selective survival. See, for instance, the edition of Jane Austen's manuscript, which we produced in 2010, and which today only the ultra-diplomatic edition of the text remains visible in its original form, based on a minimalist technological cocktail, HTML, CSS, and a very small dose of JavaScript. While the facsimile display, which used the now defunct Flash, has now become unusable and had to be redone last year. What does this example teach us? Firstly, that only international standards offer guarantees of longevity in the medium and long term, even if we cannot deny that even today the importance of those editions that have now disappeared. Thanks to them, we were able to move forward with research. We learned to dream of something that was not yet there, and we were able to work towards it. Finally, from these early failures, we learn, hopefully, not to fail today. The phenomenon characterizing the 90s and the 2000s is the emergence of standards. We have already mentioned the most important of all, which is the most widely used representation language in the world, HTML, but we cannot fail to mention the TEI as the text encoding standard and Unicode as character encoding standard. Given my experience involved in the TI consortium, which I chaired for 4 years, it will come to no surprise to anyone that I've worked word of praise for the text encoding initiative in general. But two perhaps less obvious aspects are worth emphasizing here. The first is the very fact that we are talking about international standards, which is a completely revolutionary concept for textual scholars, anchored as they are to their respective disciplinary and national school. The second is even less thought about, but it is philologists that have a long tradition of early adoption of every new technology related to writing and text transmission. For the production of new codicological models, like the humanist manuscript in the 15th century, to the production of new type of writing, again the humanistica, of the layout or the work within printer houses, to use of avant-garde method as photographs and microfilms. The history of ecdotic itself is also history of writing and reading technologies. It will come as no surprise then that among the first humanities scholars to jump into digital were the philologists, the textual scholars, and that today most of developing the TI standards and using it are philologists. What is new, however, is the international aspect of it and the powerful drive towards homogenization that the digital has brought within it. If critical editions are all somewhat similar, regardless of the discipline and the country in which they are produced, their differences are just as fundamental, even if they seemingly only concern details. But who is more detail-oriented than philologists? The push toward compromise, toward globalization, to use a strong connoted term, of philology and textual representation is certainly a novel phenomenon. Some scholars have felt the push as an imposition, and many criticisms and initiatives have overturned this technological and cultural hegemony have followed over the years. These criticisms are many and varied, and we can perhaps sum up in two different opposing categories: minimalism and maximalism. For the minimalists, the TI would be too complex and too heavy to be used, and therefore more streamlined approaches would have the advantage of being easier, would require less steep the learning curve, and would therefore be quicker to produce and maintain. Reality shows us, however, that these homemade systems are extremely expensive in the long run, and that only one that have stood the test of time are the ones that have converted into TI afterwards, like the edition of the paper of Stendhal. On the other hand, those that has adopted the 0 degree of encoding, because TI is too complicated, has chosen to use just a text, a simple text, they have done that at the expense of the representation textual stratification typical of ancient text and proverly scholarly inadequate. Also because they moved all the understanding they have from the text to the interface, to the software. And when the software fails, because they always fail, the text fails as well. According to the second approach, the one I call the maximalism, the TI would be too simple because it oversimplified the textual phenomenology that we find on the page and reduced the text to an artificial hierarchy. However, all the approaches that have been attempted to overcome this problem have failed. Graph approaches, triple approaches, ontologies, fashionable language such JSON, or invented ad hoc as liminal, none of them have managed to come even close to results produced by the TI in the short, medium term, leave it alone in the long term. So, why the TI works? Why the TI works? First of all, because it is not an individual effort, and since its conception has been the result of the work of an international and multidisciplinary team. Secondly, because the TI relies on an industrial standard that is extremely versatile and easy to learn, even for someone who is an IT novice, namely XML. You have started today. It is easy, isn't it? Yes, very. This choice made it possible to share efforts and resources and not to have to invent lukewarm water for every new project. The importance of the global character representation system Unicode must also be emphasized here. Introduced in 1992, this has made possible to represent most of the world's writing systems, contributing substantially to the decolonialization of the digital sphere. Although many writing systems still remain excluded, not to mention the limited support for the representation of writing system in diachrony. Initiatives such as the MUFI, Medieval Unicode Font Initiative, born precisely because Unicode exists, are helping to improve this situation. But these are still niche initiatives and await a wider contribution from the international community. Before I get to the second part of this talk, I would like to reflect a little bit longer about technology and the importance for humanists to get their hand dirty with it. What we have learned, in fact, is that the separation of labor between humanists and computer scientists does not work. It does not work for humanists who struggle to get what they want from computer scientists, to be listened, to be accompanied to discovery of technological innovation. It does not work for computer scientists either, who struggle to understand why of the things which they ask it to do, who struggle to find satisfaction and interest in a job that seems trivial, if not properly problematized. Putting text on the internet does not seem that difficult from the outside. But if the division of labor does not work, the dream of technological self-sufficiency works even less. No matter how much time and resources a scholar may invest in learning computer science, he or she will never, or almost never, there is some exceptions, be able to reach the professional levels necessary to guarantee the success of the resource in terms of performance, durability, and interoperability. But then what does work? Digital humanities works. That is, the training of new professional figures capable of understanding information technology and texts in a dialogue within scholars and technicians. What is still missing, though, is the recognition of these professional figures and the valorization of their contribution with long-term contracts and adequate career development. Scholars who do not hesitate to question their methods also work. Finally, computer scientists who train the digital humanities work too. So, how far have we come today with digital scientific edition, scholarly edition? On the one hand, we have achieved very encouraging results from both technical and scholarly point of view, with beautiful, innovative, free, most of the time, as well as longish-lasting edition. On the other hand, we cannot but note how printed edition continue to be produced without showing any signal of weakening. There are several reasons why we can consider the digital edition produces so far as less than satisfactory in many respects. The main problem lies on the fact that each digital edition presents the text in different ways, sometimes ascribable to traditional type of editions such as diplomatic or critical editions, and sometimes following innovative and unprecedented models that offer different types of textuality and interaction to the user, who are often bewildered by too many choices. Such diversity are present despite, and perhaps thanks to, a strong uniformity of data, as most editions using the format developed by the TI. Furthermore, from a technical point of view, the editions are offered by a very large array of different platforms, most of which are produced ad hoc for a specific project, mostly developed by a team of specialized developers and thus difficult to generalize. This means that these editions are very expensive, that can only be obtained through generous funding. Moreover, digital editions must necessarily be innovative and different each time. Otherwise, they may not obtain the funding that is necessary for their very existence, a requirement that further expand the way they create problems on the development of stable and reusable models and tools. These facts have several consequences. First, their variety produces an objective difficulty of evaluation by the scholarly community, with the results that digital editions often lack recognition and authoritative expression of ectotic research. Second, the creation of a digital edition is only possible for those scholars who can secure large amount of funding, thus cutting off a large number of potential researchers, especially those at the beginning of their careers. You know anybody like that? Thirdly, the high level of variation in these resources is, on the one hand, caused by the lack of readily available tools, but on the other hand, has prevented the development of these tools, a fact that perpetuates the problem over and over again. And finally, the specialization of such edition make their long-term preservation particularly complex and costly, with the results that digital editions are perceived as unstable and not worth investing in it. These drawbacks may help to explain why so many scholarly editors are still only publishing in print their edition, with the consequence that philologists who were amongst the early adopters of digital method, as I said before, are still torn between the desire to exploit the opportunity offered by the digital medium and the security offered by the print publication. The issue of cost seems the most pressing problem, and the one has kept many scholars away from digital editions, given the endemic lack of funding in the humanities. The contrast between the financial model of print-based edition and digital one is quite striking. The production cost of print editions is relatively low, or more precisely, their financial working models are integrated in the funding structure of most academic institutions. Printed editions are often produced during normal research time, and such that is normally produced in very, very long time, perhaps 10 years, 15 years. Funding is normally required to go to libraries, but since it takes 10 years or 15 years to do an edition, you can get small funding every year, so you can spread the cost very nicely. In fact, it's usually much easier for scholars in the humanities to access small sums of money each year than a large amount at once. In contrast, digital editions normally have a project-based financial and labor model. Since technical development usually requires the hiring of specialized workforce, the work cannot be distributed as for printed edition and must be concentrated in a relatively short time, the time of the funding. This fact requires philologists to devote a considerable amount of time at once in a focused manner. This in turn often requires further funding to buy their time from their institution, the teaching time, for instance. While this new chronology could, in many respects, be seen as an improvement, with edition becoming available in a timely manner, editorial work, however, cannot be easily compressed in this way. The attention to detail required for operations such as transcription, collation, and edition is best achieved in small doses over a long period of time. In addition, the very short time frame allowed by most funding schemes, commonly 2, 3, 4 years at most, does not allow for dealing with discoveries of new material or with the complication that has every turning pages with the old material. The result is that at the end of the funding, many editions are still not ready for public or do not meet the demanding standards of philologists. Nevertheless, they have to be published, as funds run out and the funders has to be shown something has been done with the money they've given us. The result is that many editions are put on the web with a work in progress label, coming soon, beta version, further contributing to the academic distrust toward digital editions. I have defined this type of edition haute couture edition with a metaphor that I hope you will allow me to repeat here. The fashion industry clearly distinguishes two product lines, haute couture and prêt-à-porter. The former is characterized by the fact that each piece is unique and is often created for one person to wear for a special occasion on the red carpet. Haute couture can and usually must be innovative and creative and has more to do with art and innovation than producing wearable items. Moreover, haute couture produces extremely expensive luxury items that are out of reach for most of us. While haute couture is featured on TV programs and glossy magazines, yesterday was the BAFTA, so if you have a look online, you've seen all these beautiful ladies, actresses in their gowns, It is pret-a-porter that, as the name suggests, people can actually buy in shops and wear in their everyday life, and normally they wear more than once. Pret-a-porter clothing is available in different sizes and colors and is normally worn in different occasions. These items may be inspired by the haute couture, but they simplify it, making it accessible and wearable. If we adapt this metaphor to digital editions, we notice that at the moment editions we produce are more akin to haute couture than pret-a-porter. Digital editions are typically unique, each of which come with a dedicated set of innovative, creative, expensive, and test-specific tools that was created and are normally available or are not available or hardly adaptable to reuse by third parties. Such editions require specialized personnel to create them, developers, graphic designers, web designers. They require space and servers to maintain them. They require transcriptions, encodings, digital images, but above all, they require money in spades. The amount of resources required puts them far beyond the reach of those who cannot fund this type of funding, such as, for instance, doctoral students and researchers at the beginning of their career. There are, however, several centers within various universities that specialize in digital humanities, but even these normally work as project-based, and namely that you need to find funding to give to this center to be able to access their resources. So even for universities where such a center exists, the possibility of creating digital edition is often non-extended to young or penniless researchers. The fact that access to research tools is therefore limited by economic factors, which often also translate into seniority factors, makes the creation of sophisticated, beautiful, and innovative digital resources unethical, especially since there are very few alternatives to this mode of creation. The problem is deontological, but has profound ramification and concerns the very future of digital philology. Because if we cannot have doctoral students making digital edition for lack of infrastructure, if we cannot give the opportunity to young people who are also those with the greatest inclination to launch themselves in something new and adventurous, then we cannot train the philologists of tomorrow. And we run the risk not having a real progress in a field that does have enormous scholarly potential, but for which we need critical mass of practitioners and to truly make progress. The challenge here is to imagine what could be an edition that we can call a pret-a-porter edition. That is, to imagine digital edition of the future, as well as their publisher, the editors, or rather the skill they needed to acquire to create such edition. So what is a pret-a-porter edition? It is an edition that a researcher can create simply, alone, but that takes advantage of the advances made in research developed for haute couture edition. I imagine it as a tool or a platform where there are a limited number of possible configurations. You can choose, okay, the images of the source, do I have? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Apparatus on the left as a pop-up on a different page. Where do I put it? Do I need a linguistic commentary? Yes or no. Highlighting the name of people on places, the date, having a chronology, this kind of things. This option that I can configure it, pop, the edition arrives. I also imagine it as a predefined space, digital space, and that therefore there is no need, once it is created, to go and find a server or take care of its maintenance over the time. I imagine it in sort of functioning from an academic financial model point of view as a printed edition. So what are the prerequisites for the implementation of such a system? Microsoft Word has had and is having in changing the way we write and conceive textuality. Once the tool exists, it is these affordances that change the way we think and act. For digital edition, therefore, creating publishing tools has a profound implication, and this implication can be deontological, epistemological, heuristic. That is, what the tool allows us to do will become what we will be doing. And therefore, what the tools will allow us to do will become the boundaries within which we do our scholarship. Therefore, we must be very careful what we want. For the second aspect, namely the host, the space where to put this, it is clear that the burden of finding a web space, buying a suitable domain, having the strength and the patience to take care of the edition for life is certainly not a trivial effort. It is indeed necessary to create spaces not only for the production, for which we have some tools, but also for sustainable publication and the survival of digital edition once we have finished the work. The question here is who would produce such platform? Who would take care of that? The most obvious candidate, and the one most likely to give sustainability to the whole enterprise, is the library or the archives. Why not? Libraries are institutions that are vocationally concerned with the standardization and preservation of knowledge and therefore best placed to offer such services. Example, like the Cambridge University Library demonstrate this principle, as these libraries act as publishing workshops and repositories of digital edition that they help it to shape and produce. Another interesting approach is the one offered by TextGrid, an infrastructure funded by 10 years by the German federal government and by then the European Network Area and more recently by the NFDI. TextGrid offers tools for both editing and publishing. But so far the infrastructure has been used mostly to produce generalistic type of text and to produce individual scholarly editions. And the tools it offers to analyze the text are quite simple. However, its persistence makes of this TextGrid a good starting point for what we can call a pret-à-porter edition. It is there, it works, it's supported, it's easy. It's also worth mentioning here the case of the digital scholarly journal, Scholarly Editing, which provides the editorial infrastructure for the publication of several editions per year within its regular publication series. The journal is based at University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and it is hosted by one of the specialized DH centers I was talking about before. All these examples share one very important feature. They derive from academic institutions, and as such, they can provide a mark of respectability to their editions, a non-insignificant factor when it comes to academic acceptability and career expectations. One publishing house is strongly committed to support a digital scholarly edition is the Presse Universitaire de Caen, which has developed a work organization system capable of starting from a Microsoft Word file into TI for producing both digital and print edition. Unfortunately, this is an exception. Publishing houses in general have shown very little interest in digital editions, unless these are only digitized version of printed one, PDF. This is particularly regrettable because publishing houses have traditionally been responsible for quality assurance and dissemination of the output of philological research. It is also true that the publishing model offered by the digital and the public's expectation for free access to all resources are not conditions that guarantee a commercially viable model. It is possible, however, that the creation of models and structure for so-called pret-à-porter editions and the cost saving this entails may induce publishers to engage more in the area of digital scholarly editions. As in the fashion industry, digital philology, we need both haute couture and pret-à-porter. It's not that one is right and the one is wrong. We need them both. Where the former, haute couture, has the role of experimenting, being innovative, taking the risk of failing, while the latter, pret-à-porter, assumes the role of consolidating, of proposing the advanced scholarly solution for a wider audience of scholars, enabling particular scholars at the beginning of their career to engage in digital philology in a safe way. Safe for their future career prospect, that's what I mean. The existence of these two approaches to digital edition can only be mutually beneficial, as well as providing a sustainable means of development for the discipline. The challenges ahead are more academic than technical, as technical solution and infrastructure already exist in practice. What is missing is a cultural change that can make this initiative viable. Speaking of haute couture, I come to the third and final part of my speech, namely tomorrow. In 2015, I published a couple of books on digital scholarly publishing, as mentioned before by Georg, in which I thought long and hard about issues surrounding new intellectual products that are the digital editions. Now, only 8-9 years later, I have the impression that I wrote this book in a completely different world than we are now. So what has changed since? Well, to begin with, I never mentioned artificial intelligence in that book, as it did not exist. Deep learning, computer vision, ChatGPT, you will look for them without finding them either. At the time, discussion were centered on the representational source and how computers would help us understanding text object better and differently. At the time, computational approaches were scarce, for the most part, completely marginal to the philological concerns. The main exceptions were automatic collation and phylogenetic methods for stematology, and even these struggled to be accepted by the digital editors. No matter how revolutionary we thought we were, most of us thought that these approaches were too advanced and too uncontrollable by the average researcher. Phylogenetic approaches to stematology were looked upon suspicion and condemned to live in a methodological vicious circle. If we already know the stemma, how can we be sure that what we know is not projecting the stemma to the computer? And if we don't know the stemma, how can we be sure that the computer is right? So we were stuck on that. The use of automatic collation was opposed because the manual transcription of all existing witnesses' sources seemed an unnecessary burden to add to the already heavy list of editorial tasks. At the time, the idea that we could transcribe manuscript by means of automatic OCR type of things was almost sci-fi, science fiction. And even though transcribers had already started to exist, the results were still limited to the small group of people that had created it, so it was not yet available. The use of computational system was not unknown to the age, and in particular to scholars of literature and linguistics, of course. The works of Moretti, Jokers, Giula, Cortellazzo, to name a few, occupy the front pages of newspapers. We were talking about them, of course. But yet these approaches seem far from us, mainly because they almost completely ignore, when not openly oppose, the very idea of adding markup to texts, which is the methodological core of digital philology. However, some researchers simply did not want to believe that computational methods could not be used for editorial purposes. And thanks to them, we are now seeing the prolegomena of a computational revolution in philology. I will then begin this analysis talking about HTR revolution and in general computer vision and deep learning algorithm applied to image and of ancient books. Starting in 2014, the development of Transcribus platform and the first result produced the Venice Time Machine, as well the research conducted by Lambert Schumacher, began to show the enormous potential of computer vision applied to manuscripts. A pioneering work produced by Mark Kestemon, published in Speculum in 2017, first excited the medieval studies community and then everybody else's. In his work, he showed how a neural network can recognize and classify manuscript by type of writing, as well as group them by area of production. The impact of the research has been profound on the medievalist community, which has finally begun to open up to this type of research. Kerstemont is now working on the analysis of the manuscript produced by a Carthusian monks in a monastery in Belgium, and is showing how artificial intelligence can see things that eluded scholars for centuries, such as changes of hand, for instance, simple as that, but thus revealing writing practices that are likely to change our understanding of how medieval scriptorias within monastery functions. Libraries are putting millions and millions of high-quality manuscript images online. This availability, the development of interoperable standards for data collection between countries and libraries, such as the IIIF, and the standardization of data and metadata, thanks to the CI and the FAIR protocol, all are factors contributing to the progressive and meteoric adoption of computational method in manuscript studies. Allow me to show some of this research very quickly and highlight its innovative potential. It is almost reductive to qualify Dominic Stutzman's work as innovative. Dominic is this guy here with Mike Estemon. His most recent works focus on quantitative code ecology, and in particular on the use of artificial intelligence and NLP for the study of book of hours. These prior books for the use of the laity were the bestsellers of Middle Ages. Although they are known to all medievalists, especially art historians, book of hours are often overlooked and despised as mass production. They are so abundant that they are more than the Bible at the time, more books of the Bible, and no one has ever dared to study them. Textually, they are impossible to handle. Their collections of a collection mass-produced and transcend the very idea of contamination. It's just a mess. By using a combination of technique and computational approaches, the first results are emerging and they are outstanding. We can now see how these were distinctive production groups, different offices and different liturgical emphasis, and that serve different communities. And we discover unprecedented links between these communities. Another type of research using computational analysis that produced at the École des Chartes in Paris. The team is led by Jean-Baptiste Decamps, but includes other young scholars like Aaron Panch, Thibaut Claire, you see here, Elena Spadini, Simon Gabet, for instance. These have successfully applied stilometry and automatic collation to noisy medieval data. What does noisy mean here? That is to say, for instance, that in the tradition of the Chanson de Roland and the Roman de la Rose, there are 27 different spellings for the word cheval, horse. Here, artificial intelligence approaches are combined with linguistic models, which in turn are based on dictionary databases. I might also add that the work supported by this team shows that, in fact, it is possible to use annotated TI to apply stilometric analysis, and that is actually quite useful. Jean-Baptiste Decamps is also responsible for the elaboration of the computational philology model, linking together in a coherent workflow of all pieces we have seen so far, from the digitization, distribution of images using IIIF, automatic transcription, automatic collation, annotation, data analysis, production of the stemma, and finally the edition. At the end of his talks, Camps always asks the same question: are we there yet? The answer is no, not quite. But we are getting there, one algorithm at a time. For his part, Peter Stokes and his teams at the École Pratique de Haute Étude are working toward the democratization of these tools with the development of the eScriptorium platform, an open source and completely free platform for the automatic transcription of manuscripts. This platform is particularly suited to handle non-Latin and right-to-left scripts, but of course they've been used for all types of writing, including modern and modern manuscript. As we witness these advances and the development of new research, we may have different reactions. On the one hand, we may believe that we are getting old. For some of us, this is true. On the other hand, we may begin to wonder what are the implications would be for the philological research on the long term about the use of these methods. Does this mean that we're all going out of business and that ChatGPT will take our place in editing? Not quite. And yet, of course, I don't have a crystal ball and I cannot look into the future, but perhaps I can look into the past and see what happened a few years ago when computational method arrived in another field, a germane field of linguistics, and use this as a plot to outline some possible scenario. To do that, I will use the word of Karen, this was another beautiful picture I should have shown you earlier. We use the word of Karen Spark Jones, one of the main researchers responsible for this adoption. In 2007, an article published posthumous, she reflected on the fact that there is no trace of computational linguistics in leading linguistics journals, and vice versa. And then she asked, does it matter? Is that a problem? Reflecting on the early stages of the evolution that led to the creation of computational linguistics, she noted how, in the beginning, the use of computational methods were welcomed by many as an extraordinary innovation, which only a lucky few were able to use because computers were scarce and reserved for the few. Compartmentalization gave rise to mutual suspicion and misunderstandings. She claims that since the 1960s, there's been a separation, and by the 80s it was already too clear that computational linguistics was advances without any reference to traditional linguistics. Without this lack was felt as inadequacy. She states how the growth of computational linguistics, or more specifically natural language information processing, is increasingly done by people with computational rather than linguistic background. Machine learning work needs mathematical, non-linguistic background. What she's implying is that not only have computational linguistic and traditional linguistic drifted apart, but fundamentally there's no longer any interchange between the two. And then computational linguistics is not just digital-made linguistics, but the results of an interdisciplinary research in which computer scientists are not helping the linguists, but they have merged into them or even taken their place. Let us stop here for a moment. We may or may not agree with Spark-Jones, but I think the risk of expropriation suggested here is real. Let's us go back a few years again and remember what happened when Google Books was the new toy everyone wanted to play with. The development of the n-gram viewer, you may have used it a few times, by a team of the MIT of Boston, and in particular the keynote given by Jean-Baptiste Michel and Eretz Lieberman at DH 2011 in Stanford, was greeted with much skepticism by the DH community, and rightly so, n-gram sucks. It's trivial. It doesn't do anything we haven't done for decades, but they've managed to publish their research in the right places. The research went on the cover of Science, the journal. They got all the media attention, they gave a TED lecture, and we didn't. These researchers were seen as presented as the one who brought the humanities in the 21st centuries, and they did it under our nose. I'm not suggesting that we want this kind of attention, but we should be very careful before saying, nonsense, we don't care about them. These algorithms, these techniques are difficult to master. And while learning XML and TI is affordable for a humanities researcher with a few hours of training, you will see, this cannot. As Spark-Jones said, machine learning works need a mathematical approach and not a linguistic or philological, I may say, training. It requires a commitment, dedication that I can only try to fathom. Another factor to consider is that computational approach only works with large data sets, and therefore we may not apply to most of the work we do because we work on small text. So we may think, we are safe. This is not for us, it's not a problem for us. However, being excluded, so to speak, from the latest cutting-edge development might mean that we are no longer the coolest kid on the block, and research funding might prove harder to come by. The value of our research and studies might be diminished by comparison. We know that digital philology has been used as a way for philologists to regain some academic visibility after many decades in which textual scholarship was seen as service to other scholars to do the work. The risk is now that our research results may be seen as something already obsolete. And if our texts, the texts that we care about so much because they are special and amazing, cannot be edited in this way, well, they may not be edited at all. I don't mean to scare you about computational methods. On the contrary, I think the potential and the results of these researchers are showing are stimulating and exciting. I can't wait to see what computational philology will look like. Perhaps we will be able to find out when we started to use the question marks, or we gave the question marks the meaning we give today in Europe. Or we can study which author mostly influenced the birth of Renaissance. Or we can edit the Bible, which we cannot do now because there are too many of them. Or Dante, the Commedia, for instance. What I mean is that I believe the scientific community should embrace these methods and see what can be done with them. The biggest risk here, in my opinion, is to be left behind instead of being at the forefront. What does it mean to embrace? First, we need training. Yes, more training, I'm sorry. And to gain awareness and at least a basic understanding and literacy of artificial intelligence method and technique. We need haute couture. Namely, we need ideas, we need creativity, we need to discover what can be done, and we need to dream about what cannot yet be done. Technology will follow us. We cannot follow the technology. That's not our role. We are researchers. And we must concern ourselves with ethics. In fact, methods such as the one discussed here are used all over the world for less than ethical reasons. Computer vision is used for face profiling, and text analysis is used to influence social, including election, and antisocial behavior. Being at the forefront of research today also means using and benefiting from research that perpetrates global inequality and discrimination. Methods and tools are not neutral. They have agency and implications. Ethics, deontology, self-limitation, self-regulations. These are things that we not necessarily associate with our research. Since our authors are largely dead, we are less likely to think that these things concern us. Not anymore. So, I'm finishing. I give us some homework, I think. What will digital editing look like in 10 years from now? Will editors do it, or will computer scientists do it? Will be software engineers that do the editions, or us? Will it still be called digital philology, or computational philology, or distant editing, perhaps? It's too early to say, and maybe it will become something completely different from what we see today. But I think we should be the one to decide what it is, and not let others to decide for us. Thank you.